All right, I think we're live. Welcome to a live edition of the Scores Table, the first one. Brian Hench and Danny Rega with you. This is a bit of a dry run, so going to test some things out, see how it works, and obviously there's plenty to talk about for Danny and I, so it's kind of like a test run and also a good chance for us to get ahead on some things before the next podcast. But Danny, how you doing, buddy?
I'm doing well. It's it looks like basketball season outside, doesn't it?
Yeah, I was talking to somebody walking into the Westfield game last weekend, and that's what they said, is that it's finally like it actually feels like basketball season, which is kind of nice, and it comes at the perfect time with the selection show next week.
Yep.
Yeah. So we're going to dive right into it today. We have Victoria Jacobsen joining us from the Journal-Gazette up in Fort Wayne. She had coverage last night of the Fort Wayne Snider-Homestead game, which is one that we've been looking forward to. Victoria, what's up?
Hi, how are you guys?
Good. You had a fun one last night. I guess I'll just start broadly. And what were your takeaways, thoughts on the proceedings last night in Fort Wayne?
Well, first of all, it looks like we might have another SAC champion in the works. I think I was looking back at least the fourth straight year that 4 years, 4 different champs. Snider, it's not set up yet, won 60-52. They were down by 8 after Myah Epps of Homestead scores the first basket of the fourth quarter. And it was, again, a true team effort. I saw one person say, is this Jordyn Poole's Miss Basketball moment? And, she had an incredible game, 24 points. But what was really impressive about it was that in that moment, when they were down 8, it looks like maybe this conference championship that they've talked about how much it would mean to them might be slipping away. It was Kyra Parker who came up with 2 back-to-back baskets. She scored 10 of her 13 points there in the fourth quarter, and it just sort of showed them there's so many different players that they can go to. And yeah, so they're now alone atop the SAC standings.
Speaking of that, Jordyn Poole and the missed basketball moment, how have you seen Jordyn's evolve this season? I mean, I've gotten to see her play a couple times. Danny knows her pretty well, but Victoria, for you, kind of having a front row seat up there, how have you seen her game evolve this year?
Well, it's funny you put it that way, because I thought she's kind of been the one that catches your eye for a long time now. So it's hard to even say, what more could she do after some of the things that we saw her do against, say, Fishers in the state tournament last year. But you look back, she scores 24 points. I was looking at her. I remember halfway through the game, I was thinking, it's been for her a relatively quiet night. But knowing that, even though I can check right past, she had 11 points at halftime, knowing, she's probably going to really turn it on here in the fourth quarter. And then it's just so fun. I was looking back and editing some footage from last night, and I was like, her passes are just so fun. I know that's kind of a silly thing to say, but every once in a while you just look and you're like, has she been watching those Caitlin Clark highlights? and it's just it is really fun to see her not only shine but bring in her some of her teammates and let them have their high pressure moments too.
She really is. She's like a dang magician with the ball. I mean, like her overhead passes, and then those, like, I write about it a lot, like those hockey assists that she has too, where it's just like her vision and ability, like, to project into the future and see what's going to happen, predict what's going to happen, and make those passes just unbelievable. Danny, did you have one? I couldn't tell. I didn't want to cut you off.
No. I don't. I do have a question for Victoria. Can you, a lot of our listener base is obviously Indianapolis based. Can you talk about what, and you talked about the results of the SAC championship, and when you stream the basketball game, they talk a lot about that also, but leading into sectionals, who will face who? When will so Homestead and Snider in the same sectional? When does Columbia City come into the mix? When does the Sectional 8 winner come into the mix? I know there's some reseeding and all of that, but who's going to play who? Like, what did we learn last night from a sectional perspective?
Well, in the past couple of years, it's actually been set up so the area gets kind of split up. So the north side of Fort Wayne goes to one sectional, the south side to a different one. Homestead and Snider are not actually that far away from each other. So in recent years, the battle has actually within the sectional has actually been Columbia City and Homestead, even though they are not. And I say that Columbia City is actually north of here, but you know how sectionals go. But so it's been Columbia City Homestead, that NEA SAC matchup that you've seen in sectionals. And Snider has been grouped with Carroll and some of the sort of north of Fort Wayne North schools. So in past years, we've gotten to the point where Homestead and Snider wouldn't even see each other till they would play in different. This is back when regional semifinals. So it's kind of a weird thing. They can actually go pretty deep into the tournament without seeing each other. But of course, that possibility definitely there.
It'll be really fun to have like a Fort Wayne semi-state game in the semifinals with the way that things are worked out. I'd forgotten about that. It is weird because the year, 2022, it was Snider Northwestern and Homestead had to play Noblesville, right?
Yes. And so it can, again, you can, the way that it all works out, you can go pretty deep into the tournament and not see each other, even though you're really geographically not that far from each other. And I'm trying to think, at least in my time here, I cannot remember a time that we have had those two sectional winners meet up again. Usually one of them gets knocked out earlier, but it's always a possibility. And so you kind of just have to watch how everything bounces. And again, last year, Northrop was our SAC champion, had a great regular season, and then they get bounced out of the tournament early. So we never do get to see some of those teams meet up again later. So, you can never predict anything really.
I'm curious with Homestead. I haven't gotten a chance to see them yet. What distinguishes the number 5 ranked team in the state when you see them?
Well, it's an interesting team because it doesn't look a whole lot like other Homestead teams that we've seen in the past, in that it's a completely different cast of characters. They have just one senior this year, and Emma Royce, and she's been limited because she is rehabbing a knee injury. She came in briefly in the second quarter yesterday, but they have Myah Epps, who is a sophomore, and she scored, I believe she had 27 points last night. And it was kind of funny. It really seemed like, this would be a kind of a duel between her and Jordyn Poole to see who's going to take their team across the line here in the fourth quarter. And then, we see some of Snider's other players kind of step into the mix. But Myah is, again, another player that you should be keeping an eye on. Obviously had a great season as a freshman, and then stepped up to take some really key free throws in, I believe it was her first ever sectional game. It was Homestead, Columbia City, sinks those free throws at the end of the game to knock out. Would have been a great Columbia City game as a freshman, no sweat at all. And that's kind of the attitude that she brings into these games. And yeah, so it is a lot of players who are freshmen, sophomores, maybe haven't seen a ton of playing time before, but just go out there and, as Homestead tends to do, just find a lot of success out there.
How did those young kids handle themselves last night? I mean, looking at some of the videos that you tweeted out, I mean, it looked like packed house, obviously the rivalry aspect, late season, high pressure, all that stuff. How did they handle that stage, you think?
Well, I mean, I don't want to say that anything went wrong except for Snider forcing it. I'm not in their heads, but it really seems that it was more Snider's defense that did it for them, that sort of made that fourth quarter really difficult for them. It was as packed as it's ever going to be when 3/5 of the SAC cancels games due to weather, and they decided, no, we're gonna get this game in. It was really loud for being not entirely full gym. A pretty big Snider contingent on hand. And after the game, Snider's coach Reggie Tharp even talked about that and how much support they feel from that Snider contingent, even when they're on the road. But I can look it up here real fast. I think that Snider is averaging, they're averaging 14 steals per game. And sometimes you look at high school stats and you think, that can't be right. That can't, maybe they're getting a little bit of a, generous score, a stat keeping. But then you see that Snider team play in real life and you're like, no, that feels accurate. I have viewed my own stats, 3 steals in that fourth quarter, 2 by Nene Donahue. And I know I didn't get them all just because, you're trying to do so many different things. I know I did not note them all down. They will just pick the ball for me. And they do it over and over again, multiple different players. They will come up and just smack the ball out of your hands. And they do it better than so many other teams. And it's really, really hard to lose possessions that way when you are in a dogfight with a team that also has really great shooters. And so, yeah. And I will also say, some of it is shots had been falling pretty well. You get into that fourth quarter, I think Gabby Helsum of Homestead had one shot that, rolled all the way around the rim and then rolled out. And then on the other end, I think it was Sierra Sims, had a shot that rolled and then rolled in. And it's just like, sometimes that happens. Snider gets the breaks, Homestead doesn't. And that can really kind of snowball. So
spinning ahead now with that Homestead section, I think there's some more intrigue in that one, just looking at the teams involved, and specifically Columbia City Homestead. They don't play each other head-to-head, but you've had a chance to see both again up close being in Fort Wayne. How do they stack up? How would you handicap that match?
Well, I guess if you're going to do head-to-head, Columbia City they handed Snider the Panthers' first loss of the season. Columbia City is arguably our most balanced team in the area. They are absolutely that team that has 5 different girls who can get into double digit scoring. I think at one point, this was last year's numbers, but I was trying to write a story for their sectional preview, and I was like, so they have 5 players averaging between 9 and 12 points. Okay, and that's pretty much their MO. And so they will move the ball around. They will wait to take their shot. They also have a very, when the moment is right, they have a very, very enthusiastic fan base. Earlier this year, Snider versus Columbia City. Well, actually, that was a really loud, really exciting game. I saw people there who I know are not from either of those schools.
Really?
Yeah, I was like, the Northside football coach is here. But it was kind of like the hot ticket in town. And the Columbia City Norwell game a couple weeks later had to be the loudest. I say regular season. I don't want to handicap it that way. The loudest girls basketball game I've attended maybe ever. It was wild, and that one also came down to late free throws, and Columbia City tends to maybe does not play quite at this quite at the speed of Snider, but again, just a really formidable opponent. We're at that point where we've kind of done the round robin. We've had different teams beat everybody. So it's really hard to handicap. But the thing you should know about Columbia City is that they have a junior named, oh my gosh, I'm pulling a complete senior
Addi?
moment.
Addison Baxter.
Addison, yes.
Yeah, Addi.
Who is the nice thing about being a high school sports writer is that I get to see her all the time in all sorts of different sports. See her on the soccer field, see her on the basketball court, see her run the 400 for on the track. Just has an incredible motor, and it is again one of those who will do whatever it takes to win. Take those off balance, drive into the lane, take the off balance shot, do whatever it takes, lay it all out there. So should be really exciting.
Yeah, and it is incredible too that she scores 1,000 points, and then like 2 weeks later, Kendra Sheets gets the same one.
Yes.
Like you said, with a program that hasn't done this in 20 years because everybody scores 10 to 12 points, and there's no time score like that. I mean, it's unbelievable.
It is a little unfair. Yeah, I should say, in the past, everybody scores 10 to 12 points. And then sometimes, Addison can double that. But even so, Addison did that in 3 years. Kendra's a senior, but absolutely, they can make you pay.
If I could put you on the spot, a couple more questions for you. If I could put you on the spot with that Homestead sectional, is there anybody in that group that could potentially upset the apple cart if Homestead and Columbia City are aligned on opposite sides of the bracket?
I mean, you never say never because, remember last year, we all thought that Northrop was the juggernaut, and then Carroll, which has been traditionally good, was not quite as strong last year, brings them down. Those are really the two that are the strongest this year. Traditionally, Huntington North has played like a really kind of stifling defensive style that makes games really, really difficult. It's been hard for them. They haven't been able to they've never been able to, make a huge upset in the tournament. It'll win them some regular season games, but they just haven't quite gotten over the hump and done that. Doesn't mean it couldn't happen. That's kind of, where I would say those are the strongest contenders this year.
One more question for me, and that's love to hear your thoughts on Norwell and the season that they're having. I mean, they pick off Columbia City. You mentioned that game and the incredible environment. I got to see them play against Snider at the Noblesville event over Christmas break. I mean, they look like a 3A juggernaut right now.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. I will say Norwell traditionally has been one of the smoothest and one of just sort of just have the most, this is going to sound weird, one of the prettiest teams to watch, the way that they move the ball. And again, they play an incredibly hard schedule. I remember talking to their coach about their early season schedule. They go on the road to play Warsaw. They take on Carroll. They really take on all comers. Even though they play in the NE8, they go out of their way to play, a lot of the 4A Fort Wayne schools and really test themselves. And so they're going to be about as battle tested as anybody. Absolutely.
Well, Victoria, thanks so much for hopping on with us. With everything, with all the good teams you have up there, hopefully we'll get to do this again soon with the sectional post-game show or regional semi-state, however far this thing goes.
All right. Well, thank you all so much.
Thanks, Victoria.
Problem. Take care. That was Victoria Jacobsen with the Journal Gazette. Danny, we have some more games to talk about. We discussed a few. I tweeted a few, but I will let you pick where we start.
Well, I think before we move on, I did have an opportunity to watch that Snider-Homestead game, and just with the flow, and we don't get to talk to Victoria very often. I thought there were some interesting things that happened in that game regarding coaching. So Reggie Tharp at Snider versus Rod Parker at Homestead, that's kind of the game within the game. And I thought Reggie Tharp made a conscious effort in preparation and implementation of that basketball game to not allow the three-point shooting of Homestead to beat them. And if you go back and watch the game and watch certain possessions, they stayed home on Helsum, Hankenbrook, Mollering, like they're three-point shooters. I think Hankenbrook and Helsum, I think, are 45 and 41% three-point shooters respectively. But what was unique about that decision that Reggie Tharp had is they were making themselves vulnerable in the middle of the floor, and Myah Epps hurt him for 27. The difference in that, and she's great, by the way, like her Euro stepping, like I almost felt like I was kind of watching like a girl's version of Luka Doncic. Like she's fantastic when she gets into traffic. But I think the absence of a Homestead role player to step up like Kyra Parker did for Snider, I thought ended up being the ultimate difference in the basketball game. I thought Jordyn Poole was Miss Basketball good. I thought Myah Epps was 2026 Miss Basketball good in that game. But you had 13 points from Kyra Parker. But out of those 13 points, she had 2 separate 5-0 runs by herself. So she would hit a 3, then hit a 2. And then 2 minutes later, she would hit a 3 and then hit a 2. That's 10 of them. And then her 3 for her 13th point ended up making, I think, a 49-46 basketball game. But I think the way that Tharp decided that he was going to tag the shooters, I think was really smart. And I thought ended up probably winning them that basketball game. But just kind of an interesting kind of side note. But you know, the last point that I would have before moving on to some of those other games, you know, Fort Wayne, and I didn't have a chance to ask Victoria this, but when you have Jordyn Poole in 24, Addi Baxter in 25, and Myah Epps in 26, you know, hopefully the Indianapolis audience doesn't have too much of a regional bias. I mean, we see kids like Lampley and Makalewski and Reagan Wilson. I mean, we see those kids on the reg down here. We don't get to see very often unless there's a big game. Baxter, Epps, and Poole. And I think last night's performance with Poole having 24 and Epps having 27, I think it illustrates that those kids have big game DNA. And a lot of times you have to win a bunch of games in Fort Wayne to really grab the Indianapolis audience. But there's some really good basketball being played at the team level and individual level up in Fort Wayne. And I think those kids are just really, really good examples of it. So, you know, I just kind of hopped on a little monologue there, but I did want to add those thoughts because I had a lot of fun streaming that game last night.
I'll tempt fate and pivot to a discussion on that. The last time we did this, we went 3 hours, but I wonder if the Fort Wayne thing, if it's changed a little bit with schools like Snider, because they are so deep and so good. And I remember when Noblesville won that tournament in 22, and even last year with Fishers, it was like, okay, the big Goliath that they have to take on next, the next big team that really scares you. I mean, Homestead was good with Yana Patterson, but Snider, like it was Snider. It's like they play fast, they have Poole, Donahue, everybody. And I mean that 2 years ago, they were even deeper because they've been hit by some transfers or whatever. But I mean, they're kind of like the standard. Homestead, since I've moved here at least, seems like they're always there. They had a Miss Basketball winner. Now they have Myah Epps, obviously, and an issue with what Columbia City's done where they have come down here and beaten some of those teams. Obviously, we didn't know a lot about them before the HSE game. Like that was a joke that we had. And to the point that Josh wrote a formal apology and did his research on Columbia City. But I'm curious. I wonder if it changes a little bit. And if it has changed a little bit, that Fort Wayne is getting the attention from basketball fans in the Indianapolis area.
Well, I don't think there's any question that they are waiting for another breakthrough. Mm-hmm. Sectional 8, which we talk about a lot, and everyone was like, oh, they're always talking about Sectional 8, but
it's good.
Look at the winner of Sectional 8, which is the Hamilton County Sectional with Noblesville and Fishers and Hamilton Southeastern and Zionsville, has had the North runner-up in the state championship 4 of the last 6 years. So
finalist for the last 6?
For a finalist, and not the state champ. Thank you for the correction there. A finalist 4 of the last 6 years in Zionsville, Fishers, and HSE and Noblesville in any sort of order there. You have to really date back, I think, at the 4A level, I think you have to date back to the Homestead outfit that had Carissa McLaughlin to find Fort Wayne's last state champ. So, you know, while there is a little bit of a dynastic run by the Sectional 8 champ in 4 of the last 6 years, making it to Gamebridge Fieldhouse, it's not due to the lack of talent that's up in Fort Wayne and particularly the individual talent. And a lot of people, I think, really know these names, but I think that's really all they are here. I think they've got to get a breakthrough. I mean, I think they've got to hitch their wagon to a Columbia City, hitch their wagon to a Homestead, hitch their wagon to a Snider. Whoever does that whoever comes out of that mess, and I keep saying it like that, but whoever comes out of that mess, if they can put a couple of wins together and get to Gainbridge Fieldhouse, that will be a breakthrough. I mean, Kristen McLaughlin graduated high school in 2017. I mean, I think that was the last team to do it. So we're on a long run right now, without seeing deep penetration in the state tournament by a Fort Wayne team. But they do really have good teams. I mean, Columbia City we talk about at length. Snider we've talked about a little bit more. Last night was the first time that I really had an opportunity to really watch and evaluate Homestead. I've always just given Coach Rod Parker the just the easy card. Oh, he's going to be there in the end. But he's done a nice job with that basketball team. Victoria's right. They are a little bit different. There isn't, there's the budding star, obviously, in Epps, Ankenbrook, Helsum, and Mullering. I mean, Mullering comes out and hits 2 threes in the first quarter, right? The first 3 minutes of the basketball games. Epps doesn't score till I think it was like 90 seconds left in the first quarter, but Mullering hits 2 threes, and I literally kind of rolled my eyes to myself, like, oh, this is what Homestead does. They just make shots. So I think that'll be interesting. I think the Columbia City crew was probably all watching that basketball game. I think we're all just kind of waiting to see it kind of hash out, but we'll see what happens.
Wrapping that up, you were right. 2017 Homestead beat Pike in the final that year. Since then, it's been Warren Central, HSE, Lawrence North, Crown Point, Noblesville, BNL. And then I think the year that Zionsville made it out to the final in 2018 and lost to Warren Central, they were coming. That was their last year in that sectional with the Lafayette, some Lafayette team, Harrison Lafayette, and some other random teams. Yep. So it was before they moved over to Section 8. But your point still stands. I mean, back-to-back years now they've had a finalist. Seems like every year they have a semi-state team in there. So, but I mean, like we talked about, and like I wrote in my Miss Basketball story. I mean, it's that's kind of like the last hurdle for Jordyn, Poole, and that Snider bunch, that specific group of girls that they have right now, that senior class, is to get over the hump. They came really close last year against Fishers. I thought they could have done it the year before. I think I actually picked against Noblesville that year of the state run. But now it's like, okay, it's do or die time, now or never time. So it'll be interesting to see. It'll be fun.
Yeah, final point, just to punctuate that. I would just encourage everybody, just keep an eye on that. They could conceivably have 3 consecutive Miss Basketballs. I mean, they definitely have 3 consecutive Miss Basketball candidates in Poole in 24, Baxter in 25, Epps in 27. That's all due respect to all of the great players like Donahue and Sims and Helsum and Ankenbrook and Sheets and all of those kids that will contend to wear an Indiana All-Star jersey at some point in time. But this is normal for Fort Wayne. They just haven't been able to break through. So if you guys have an opportunity, go back and watch. Epps is awesome last night. Poole is awesome last night. What a great matchup. Can't wait to watch it in sectionals.
All right. Dealer's choice. Danny, you get to pick. Do you want to go Zionsville or do you want to go HSE?
You had the best. You were at Zionsville-Noblesville. I mean, and that game flow and following your tweets, that seemed like the best game. So, let's start there.
Just an unbelievable game. I think Noblesville gets it out. They're up by 9 at the end of the third. I think they got it out to 11. Kind of a dreadful third quarter for Zionsville, which I think hit 3 shots, a couple threes by Mackenzie Chapman, the freshman. But then at the end of the third quarter, and this was big, and it felt big in the moment where it's like, okay, we're going to bend the ear of this page and see what happens. They get a stop on defense, which is something that they've been struggling with against Noblesville. Zionsville did. I think it was a steal or something like that, and then they threw up a buzzer beater that just barely bounced out. Anyway, you could feel them kind of getting some energy back, and they got their legs back. And then they started hitting shots. And it really does. We talk about resiliency a lot, especially with high school sports, but it really does with Zionsville apply here because they're coming off a game where they blew an 18-point lead to North Central. And North Central's good, don't get me wrong, but that's a team that Zionsville should beat most nights. And I'm sure the computers had Zionsville winning pretty handily. They didn't. And in some ways, I think that was kind of one of the best things that could have happened for us because it's a wake-up call and a reminder for how they need to play. But yeah, getting back to Noel's game, I mean, and then things just took off. Everybody contributed. Brooklyn Karish had a great game. She scored 3 straight buckets, and then Emma Hahn puts in a 2 to make it a 2-point game. Noblesville pushed away a little bit more, but can never quite pull away. And then Allie Caldwell, and we have the highlight here queued up. Allie Caldwell with this 3-pointer. This coming after a string of, I want to say, 3 to 5 misses by Zionsville as a team. I mean, they came out on fire from 3 and then cooled off significantly. And they knew it was going to happen. They knew that it was going to regress to the mean. But they kept with it, and then Addi does this. Caldwell bangs in the 3, ties it with 23 seconds left. Noblesville gets to the line, misses both free throws. Tipner did, and then Tipner comes back down on the other end and does this. Just unbelievable bounce back by Tip. I mean, just incredible. And the way that game had been officiated, like it was tightening up as the game progressed. For Tip to do that cleanly and to save the game against Faith Levy, who was unbelievable last night, was just incredible. Then in overtime, back and forth a little bit at the start. Free throws again loom large, where Noblesville wasn't able to hit enough. Zionsville did. Got against some big baskets. Emma Hahn, who did a terrific job defensively, I thought, against Reagan Wilson, knocks down some shots. Chapman hits another 3. And then Zions was able to hang on for a 71-66 overtime win. Real quickly, Danny, before I throw it to you, first takeaway is that sectional tournament is going to be insane. I think, Noblesville's played with HSE. They've lost officials but hung with them. And now they've hung with Zionsville and lost to them. So that's going to be unbelievable. And then 2, again, Zionsville's not a very deep team. They usually only run about 6 deep. But man, when those 6 are all firing the way they are, and it's not just Emma Hahn and Allie Caldwell, I mean, they're a dangerous team. They're a really dangerous team when they're able to get going like that.
Yeah, I agree from a Zionsville perspective. By the way, nice job on the highlights. That's kind of a new touch. I don't know if we only have the capability to do that when we're live. I was like, is he really going to go to the highlights? But anyways, nice job there.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's increasing in production.
That's right.
But you showed the highlight of the Allie Caldwell 3, and we had touched on it in previous episodes leading up. The experience, okay, and the class of 24, Lillie, Caldwell, Hahn, they're so experienced in big game play, but now what you're starting to see is them gather experience in making big shots in big basketball games. And we can argue, just how good of a win that is against Noblesville, but in that sectional, that thing plays. Like, that's a big time win. And in order to get that, you have the Caldwell 3 that we had mentioned. I think Emma Hahn hit the first 3 of overtime. It's just big time shot making in a basketball game that you have to have it. And so I think what we've learned going into it is Zionsville can win a game in sectional. Can they win 2? Can they win 3? We'll find out, but they're going to be a tough out because of kids like Emma Hahn and Allie Caldwell. And let's not, the highlight was Tipner there at the end of regulation, I think that was. But Faith Levy was the one. I mean, if you watch that highlight and watch everybody else on the floor, everybody else has stayed home. They stayed home on Caldwell. They stayed home on Emma Hahn. Tipner gets ISO'd in the open floor against Faith, who does get downhill and does get a step on Tipner, and the recovery to contest and challenge and alter the shot at the rim or block the shot at the rim, I think is a great play.
Yeah, bouncing off that, Danny, real quick, just because you mentioned it, I think I texted you about this, but Zionsville had a lot of success with that play earlier in the game, and it's probably for those exact reasons that you said, because they're so worried about those other 2, and it clears up space and lane. So when she went in, I was like, okay, that's ball game, and then SWAT. Sorry, go ahead.
No, but one of the hardest things to do is to keep somebody in front of you in the open floor. And that's a team that traditionally plays a lot of zone, and to be able to go into man in that situation and be able to make a play on the defensive side was a great play by Meredith Tipner. But, globally, when you look at that basketball game, I think what we're starting to find now, I think, is the different tiers within Sectional 8. Okay. And we have known for a long time that Noblesville is going to be a very tough out. And we have known for a very long time that Zionsville is going to be a tough out. There's that play by Tipner. Yeah, like if you see Emma Hahn's not even in the frame there. She's probably way up on the outside left slot right there with a defender, probably just face guarding her would be my guess. But these teams now are starting to get ready for it, and I think Zionsville took a big step toward being a tough out, and Andy has to be really happy at the conclusion of it because there was because he got what he needed, I think, out of Emma Hahn and Allie Caldwell.
Mm-hmm.
And Faith. There's just that 24 class.
Yeah, they're unbelievable. And apologies, Dan. I didn't mean to interrupt your
flow.
flow.
No, you're fine.
Again, tinkering and trying to see what works. And that's cool how we can double box. So we'll have B-roll when we start doing these during sectionals potentially. So like I said, we're really ratcheting up the production value here. And two, one other point before, I'd love to talk with you about Sectional 8 because we're going to have the draw here soon. And next episode, I don't know how much time we'll have on it, but Caldwell, 17 points, 7 assists, 6 rebounds. Bleedy, 15, 5 rebounds, 4 assists. Hahn, 4 assists, 12 points. Chapman, 12 points, 7 rebounds, 2 assists. Karrasch, 9 points, 7 boards. Sampson, 7 boards, 6 points. I mean, just everybody. And again, pick a point during the game and it's a different kid stepping up. And that's really encouraging to see for them.
Yeah.
For Noblesville, yeah. I mean, it's a loss and it's a heartbreaking loss. And no, they're bummed out. But again, I look at them there versus when I saw them, even just against HSE, because I don't think the Bolingbrook game is a fair comparison. Because I mean, we see what Bolingbrook did to South Bend, Washington last week. I mean, that wasn't even close. Just the growth of that team, like they're figuring some things out, and obviously you really need Reagan Wilson, you really need Meredith Tipner to play well. But Cece Quigley, I'll go back to her. She's been emerging really well in her sophomore season. And then just kids coming off the bench and stepping into roles. Hutchinson again last night had to play some big minutes because Mott's ran into trouble. And then some other kids too where they just slot in and they're just role players, but they're doing little things and they're getting incrementally better. And that's good to see and it's important to see. And, I think Noblesville is going to be as tough out as anybody. And I think what's going to be good for them this year is that they're coming in from a different spot. They're coming in from under the radar. They're not the team to beat. They don't have to wear that target on their back. It'll just be interesting to see how much they have left in the tank, because to go through that sectional, to run to state, then to go to that sectional and do what they did last year, and then to play the schedule they did this year, I think the cumulative toll, I mean, that's a lot. That's a lot of basketball, a lot of heavy games, a lot of games to get up for. So I'm curious to see how much they have left in the tank. But I mean, I wouldn't bet against them, to reach the final or to win the sectional and to move on, and honestly to run deep in the state tournament, just because, I mean, they have the pedigree, the experience, and all that stuff. It'll be interesting to see.
Yeah, there's no question. And I think the formula now, I think we know, like, it's really tough for them to win if Reagan and Tipner both aren't producing offensively. And if you look back at some of the holiday tournaments, I mean, I think some of the statistical, backing to my point there is, like, I mean, I think Reagan had 30 in one game, Tipner has 21 in the same game to get 50 points. I mean, last night they're kind of in that 30 range, and maybe that's okay because a lot of Sectional 8, I think, is played on the defensive sides, but so it'd be interesting, but it's tough. I think it's got to be tough when both of those kids are asked to go out and produce offensively in a basketball. And we're seeing this across the state. The Noblesville isn't the only basketball team that's struggling with this. I made the point when talking about, Homestead and Snider in that basketball game. You talk about the 27 that Myah Epps had, but it was the role players around Jordyn Poole's 24 with Kyra with 13, for example, Kyra Parker with 13 that really got them going. But on a good note though, I mean, they did get 14 from Quigley. They did get 13 from Ava Shoemaker, which is really good to get them back. But I think Noblesville has to put that behind them and just say, hey, that's a rivalry game, boys, girls doubleheader. Can't learn a lot from it. I think Zionsville on the other side is, hey, this is who we are. We're a tough out. We can win this sectional. I think there's two totally different narratives and two totally different locker rooms all converging on the same sectional, I think is going to be interesting.
I was thinking about this on the drive up to Zionsville last night of who this game matters more to. And obviously it doesn't matter to anybody because they don't see the tournament, and that sucks. But I think it was more important, and this has nothing to do with effort or anything like that. It's just kind of like a journalist, if I had to write the story narrative type of thing or whatever, handicapping that going in. I think it was probably a little bit more important for Zionsville just because of how they lost to North Central. You lose a game by 18 points to North Central, and then, I mean, it looked like they were going to get run out of the gym by Noblesville. But even if they didn't, if they come back and lose it at the buzzer to Noblesville, yeah, you're feeling okay, but not great. Instead, they have a great rally after a tough loss. They beat their rival now 2 of the past 3 years, where all 3 games have just been unbelievable. I remember the first time that I talked to Allie Caldwell was after she went off from 3 against Noblesville in 22. Then last year, Reagan did it in 23, and then this year it's a total team effort. So it felt a little bit more important from a mental side of things and just spinning it forward for Zionsville. But for Noblesville, I think that there's some positives to clam onto, and that's important.
I agree. I think I definitely agree. You can make the argument that it was more important for Noblesville, but in the end, I think the conclusion has been drawn that we're going to need to see something special from Wilson and Tipner and kind of that Batman and Robin duo to really make a deep run. And we could, because they're totally capable of that. But if you look at Zionsville's losses, Lawrence Central, Fishers, Franklin, I mean, these are some of the better teams in not just the area, but the state. And I think winning one that maybe some people didn't think they were going to win going into it, I think is a big mental hurdle for kids. If they had lost the basketball game, I'm probably in this little box saying, oh, well, they're experienced. They have a bunch of 24s, but they'll be fine in the end. But now they have it. It's probably one of their better wins of the season.
Yeah, definitely. And then I have for this week's Fab 15, I break down the sectionals for everybody and kind of spin it ahead. And there's a kind of staggering statistic that I always forget about until postseason time starts with. Zions won that sectional tournament, and this is the type of win that maybe helps them kind of swing it and reverse that trend in a year when it does feel wide open. So it'll be interesting. Danny, the game that you were at and a team that's going to be playing here in about 2-3 hours, Westfield, they lose to HSE last night. What were your thoughts on that game?
Great crowd, well-coached basketball game. They're just short of talent when compared to their opponent last night, HSE. I mean, the basketball game wasn't anything. It wasn't like, oh my gosh, I can't believe they're doing this coaching wise or schematically or whatever. They just HSE just outclassed them. And there wasn't really much more to it than that. The question that I had coming into it was, can Westfield beat Fishers, HSE, Noblesville, or Zionsville if they pair up in the first round of the tournament? Okay. I had the same question about Carmel. Okay. Now, I think the answer to the question is still yes. I think they can, but I think things need to really fall in their favor. Okay. So what I mean by that is this. Westfield's draw for somebody like them, I think, is going to be really important because, I think you want to try to have time to prepare. Okay. Maybe put something special in. So if they get like a Tuesday night game against Fishers, for example, it gives them a couple of weeks to prepare, gives them a lot of film study. It gives them a lot of time to implement something new should they want to do that. Here's what Noblesville does have, okay? They have really, really, really smart basketball players, okay? Like, Crockett and Lovelace and Kelleher and crew, like those kids, if they're given a game plan, a couple of weeks that's a little bit special or a little bit unique, I think they can execute it really, really well. By and large, the lack of offensive firepower on that basketball team is probably going to be their eventual undoing. HSE didn't play their best game offensively and hasn't in a while, and they go out and get 64 points. And that's not an incrimination of the defense of Westfield. That's just the unbelievable firepower that HSE has. They just come at you. And in a basketball game where you're like, I'm not making really shots, or they're not really getting this kid going or that kid going, or this, there's not, the extra pass isn't being made or whatever. You look up, they still have 64 points. And that's a really difficult number to get to. It means you got to get to 65. So you have to very naturally and oversimplify it. Say, can Westfield get to 65 against any defense? And right now, I think they got to guard you to keep the game in the 50s to try to knock you off.
Yeah, that was what's interesting. I saw them last Saturday against Hamilton Heights. Heights plays just such a slow style, or not slow. It's methodical. It is slow. But they have Cam Runner. And it was interesting because Westfield was doing a good job of staying with it. Like they'll lull you to sleep and then Cam hit you with a shot. Westfield did a good job of staying active, getting up there, pressuring them a little bit, and deflecting some passes and causing problems. But then, like you said, on the other end, it's missed shots around the basket, some missed three-pointers, some hurried shots, and things like that ended up costing him in the end in a close game against a quality team. So it's a tough team to catch the read on. Like if you catch them on the wrong night for your team, I mean, you could be toast on opening night of sectionals just because of the way they defend. The Van Dyke kid for them is really good.
Yeah.
Defensively, and also doing a great job with that group of girls. It's just like you said, can they score enough if they're facing a team like HSE? And it feels potentially like the answer is no. You never want to write them off completely, but the way that defense goes, I think that travels really well. So it'll be interesting to see. It just feels so contingent on the draw. Like if they get a Fishers or maybe even a Noblesville, like that feels like not a favorable matchup, but a winnable matchup. Same thing probably with Zionsville. The one that doesn't is HSE. Like that feels like a hill a little bit too tall to climb. Obviously, Carmel feels probably the most even of all of them, but it's fascinating. And that sectional, more than in years past, feels like it's going to be kind of contingent on the draw, who gets who. In years past, in terms of handicapping a favorite, but that's a discussion for another day.
Yeah. To go to the other side to go to the blue side of that game last night. Satterfield I had an opportunity to talk to him after the basketball game too. He was, we were just kind of standing on the corner while the boys were warming up. He's trying some things out. He didn't tell me this. I just noticed it just because I was at the game and watching it, but he had 2 possessions where he was in a quarter court sagging 2-3 zone. They introduced an odd front 1-3-1 half court trap with Myah McAlusky at the top. Incidentally, by the way, that led to a turnover. They got a layup on it. Satterfield is he's really calm and cool and stoic on the sidelines. And even he actually applauded his team for turning him over. But that's a team that is really comfortable, I think, right now, to be able to try things like that. To try to introduce more. I don't think it's gamesmanship by Satterfield. I don't think he's trying to put it on film. I think he's trying to figure out what is my secondary defense? What's my tertiary defense? Maybe he finds something out that's really unique. I don't think that going to a 1-3-1 half court trap against Westfield was something that within the game flow of the Westfield game that he was doing. I think it had everything to do with the state tournament and sectional 8, but just kind of an interesting point. I mean, but that team, they're starting to really get offensive production now from KK Holman. And it's really tough sledding for McAlusky and Stidham to get their volume now. And they really have to work hard to get their volume. And when they get their volume, they're going to score points because they're so good offensively and so talented offensively, particularly shooting the basketball. But now teams are starting to really, really, really stay home now on Mac and really starting to stay home on Kayla. And now, and that's not brand new information, but Holman now is starting to operate in the middle of the floor now and starting to finish. She's starting to make her free throws. I think she's got 2 20-point plus basketball games last night included. And I think the last 3 or 4 times out. So Satterfield and HSE, while they're one of the top, 1, 2, 3 teams in the state, I think they're really starting to really sharpen the axe. And that axe is going to be really, really sharp, having to go through Lawrence North this week, which incidentally, I think is going to be played at a middle school, which I think is going to be an awesome environment. And then they close against Center Grove. And so another thing that absolutely. Another thing that I would point out is that those are very, very, very contrasting styles too. So HSE now, I think is really going to have one of the more collective resumes in just battle testing across different styles against different basketball teams to get ready for the tournament. But they were impressive last night.
Absolutely. A few other games of note last night. Fishers, Brownsburg, 40-38. I was scrolling Twitter looking through Brownsburg. The Bulldogs took a run at the Tigers, held them to 40 points. Obviously, that's impressive. They kept it close, 40-38. And speaking of Fishers, I'm going to have a story hopefully here around sectional time on Talia and her older sister Ty, who plays in the WNBA. Heritage Christian fame. So keep an eye out for that. Franklin Central has won 6 games in a row, by the way, 57-47 over Avon. And I think Franklin Central's lumped in with the Ben Davis Roncalli sectional. That is anybody's guess as to who's the favorite there. But huge win for the Flashes, and they're on a bit of a run now. Avon, they were coming off of a big win over Ben Davis, the first time in a while that they'd beaten them on the road. I have that number written down somewhere. But a great win for Avon, but then a mixed bag with the loss to Franklin Central, but nothing to stick your nose up at. I think Franklin Central is a really young team. I'm hoping to see them before the end of the year because I saw them in the opener when it's a bunch of young kids finding their way. So now that we're here at the end, I'm excited to see how much they've grown, and kids like Duval and all that, how they've grown around their Lillie Graves, who I want to talk about, Danny, before we get off here, because I get the hype now. It's real. Jennings County 65-11 over Greenwood, only notable because Julianne Woodard, all-time scoring leader now in Jennings County history. So congratulations to Julianne. And then New Pal Pendleton Heights, another one, 52-48. That had some conference implications there. Now the Dragons control their own destiny in the HHC. Miller went for 25. Allie Blum, Kentucky softball commit, went for 12. So those are some notable scores from Friday. Danny, any thoughts for those?
No, I'll kind of wait. I do have thoughts that I think you'll probably parlay into city championship. I think probably next, right?
Yeah. Real quickly though, a couple other milestones. Tuesday, Adrian Tolan at West Lafayette, all-time leading scorer, and then at Fort Wayne Carroll, I was there for that game to see Lillie Graves. Allie Harness cleared 2,000 career points, and that kid from the three-point line, I mean, just give her the ball a little bit of space, and she's shooting, and she's probably hitting. But a really fun game up in McCutcheon. Yes, the city championship. I'm just going to throw this. It's in overtime. Chatard is down. Olivia Berzai, the sophomore, with the shot. See, I'm learning this on the fly, so I'm freezing.
What a cool moment.
Yeah, just an unbelievable shot by Berzai. I'll run it back here while Danny and I talk. But Danny, I'll let you break down the film here.
Yeah, well, okay. So there's 4.9 seconds left. Jada Wilson's at the line, misses the first one, makes the second. So that's why they have the ball. That's why the ball is out on the end line, and it's a 2-point lead and not a 3-point lead. I think that's an important distinction. At 4.9 seconds, full court in that scenario, up by 3. That's generally a fouling situation. Leave it right there for a second, Hank. The first thing that you'll notice is the person that's guarding the basketball out of bounds is at half court. So Lisa Finn already is telling you, you're not going to beat us long. So they're in man and they're matched up. So what Lisa's probably telling her team right now is you really do have to stay home, and you really have to try to keep the person, if they have the ball in front of you. All you're trying to do if you're Chatard, okay? All you're trying to do if you're Chatard is get something going downhill in the open floor, okay? Mike D'Antoni famously said long ago that the hardest thing to do in basketball is to guard somebody in the open floor. And Dan Snyder's able to, and I don't know if this is a read off of it or if this was the original play, but because Cathedral is picking her up at half court right there, you easily have a comeback to the inbounder, and now you have that exact downhill. And then as the play develops, I said you got to stay home, right? Well, you have help off of the strong side wing. It's one very simple pass. And credit to Olivia for knocking it. Berzai, am I pronouncing that correctly? I don't want to just call her Olivia. Yeah. So Olivia Berzai, she just steps right into it. She knows that help came off of her. Because there's not a help the helper situation, because everybody is staying home, that's going to be a clean shot. But if you go back and watch that overtime game, there's a lot of really, really good coaching that that Dan Snyder and Lisa Finn do in that basketball game. I think, Dan Snyder came out in zone, for example, for a possession. But that last play, what a moment. Chatard's a good basketball team that can make a deep run within their class. And that's the kind of play that can really springboard them and give them a ton of momentum.
Dan Wagner, what's great, I love talking to Dan because he explains everything and just like the thought process that went into the way that he built the schedule. Where they started the year at Scottsburg, and he loves to tell the story about how everybody in there is against you, including the folks in the front row who have had their seats reserved, for every single game for years now. And then they play a Mount Vernon out of 4A, and then Gibson Southern, another really quality 3A team, and then they go out, and they play in that event at Twin Lakes in Monticello where they get to play Crown Point right out of the gate. And looking at that field, it's like, okay, Chatard's probably the one team that can match up with Crown Point, and they did, and they took them out to get in the winner's bracket. Then they play that 81-78 overtime thriller against Twin Lakes before playing McCutcheon in the championship game. But you can just see the culmination of all these little things building up and giving them the confidence, the experience, etc., to step up in those moments. And just what a game. The description of Olivia Berzai that I got from the night before, she's a soccer player, I think was the second leading scorer for Chatard. Either way, Anna Caskey described her as an athletic demon, which I thoroughly enjoyed, and I think they enjoyed it too, because it was just kind of an off-the-cuff description. But she really is. She's a great player, and they have a nice little 1-2 inside with her and Caskey. And the night before against Heritage Christian, I saw that game. It came down to free throws, and it was Anna Caskey who struggled at the line this season. She's the first one to admit it, but she's really been working at it, and she's saying some clutch free throws. She went 3 for 4, and then on the fourth one she missed. She grabbed the rebound to help them bleed off some more time, and that all offset a huge run by Jocelyn Marshall, who was really, really good for Heritage Christian down the stretch. That's going to be a fun. It's going to be a fun sectional to watch. I think those are your two favorites right there, but I wouldn't count out a team like Brebeuf from going on a run. We'll see what happens with Guerin. Obviously, we talked about some of their injury issues last week, but maybe they pop in there, factor in there somehow. But that's an interesting group right there. From the Cathedral.
I think I got a text that Morelli's coming back, by the way. I don't
really?
It wasn't. It was from not from a. It was from a parent of somebody that I know really well. That their daughter goes to Guerin and said that G's coming back.
Good.
So,
hopefully that's true. I mean, that'd be awesome. I mean, you hate seeing kids get hurt. But I mean, if she's back, I mean, that changes not everything, but it changes a lot.
Yeah.
In that sectional. From the Cathedral side of things, it's a process. And against Covenant Christian, that was a very surprising game, if I'm being blunt. And I think that it was surprising for everybody involved, where Cathedral had to rally late to beat Covenant Christian, a 2A school. Credit to Covenant Christian. Their two leading girls hit some shots. They defended pretty well. They were wholly unfazed by Cathedral's length, which was probably the most jarring takeaway from that entire game. Was Covenant Christian looked comfortable. But from the Cathedral side of things, it was just frustration of constantly shooting themselves in the foot and finding ways to trip themselves up before they finally figure things out a little bit. They're dealing with some stop and go-ness with kids playing other sports and having to miss practices and games for different reasons. I think Lisa Finn said that's only their third time in the past month with everybody there. So that gives you an idea of just how much fluctuation and turnover, temporary turnover there's been. But it'll be interesting to see where they go, because they have some good pieces there. Taylor Lewis, for instance, she's a good player. They have a lot of other good players. Jada Wilson, obviously, the young kid, has made some big shots for them. But it's a really tough sectional they're stepping into with the Lawrence schools, Warren, and everybody else.
Yeah. And Jada has a lot on her shoulders too, and it makes it very difficult for Lisa, because I think in preparing to coach against Lisa, if you just look at the microcosm of overtime in the city championship, I think Jada took every shot in the overtime, aside from a kind of a breakaway layup on a live ball change of possession. And I think Taylor Lewis ended up giving them, I think, a 1-point lead with a layup. But everything else was done by Jada. And they're in the game, by the way. I mean, Jada performed. Mm-hmm. So I think she's really starting to learn, maybe how to be, that kind of kid that Lisa leans very heavily on. But I marveled really at Chatard and their ability to make a play at 4.9 seconds. Like, that's all. Like, how many times do you see, like, you're going to a game and you're like, I just want to see a good game. I just want to see a good game. What a finish. And my heartfelt, and I'm so embarrassed by this, my heartfelt apologies. Hank corrected me. I was calling him Dan Snider. I don't, probably because of Fort Wayne Snider's in Myah. Dan Wagner. My apologies to Chatard and Coach Wagner on that. I didn't mean to, because you were really good, Coach Wagner.
It doesn't really get much easier for Chatard. They play Roncalli, Franklin County, Tri-West, and Brebeuf. Interesting games. Tri-West, I just wanted to mention, they rallied last night for a win over Lebanon. With Tri-West, for how things went last season, kind of a tumultuous season, it's been cool to see that turnaround this year. We talked about that earlier. Josh Sable obviously had a relationship with Justin Bennett from his time at Greenwood and Joshua Franklin, but he's done a really good job with that team. That sectional with Daniels probably going to come down to those two teams, so it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. And yeah, I mean, it was a really busy week. Tuesday, especially, just milestones everywhere. Tipner, I don't know if we mentioned this earlier, but Meredith Tipner of Noblesville hit 1,000 career points on Tuesday night. So congratulations to her. They have a couple now with her and Reagan. There's the scoring records going down 2,000 points. It just all happened at once on Tuesday. And a kid from Shelbyville, Johnson, I think is her last name, broke the single game rebounding record, which she'd set in the season opener with 22 boards on Tuesday night. So that's pretty cool too.
Yeah. There, I think we'd be remiss too if we didn't mention Thursday night. Lawrence Central had the rematch against Lawrence North. And maybe just to encapsulate that game, that one was heated, like really, really heated. I think there was a moment late in the second half where, like I think it was Lola Lampley and Winston are even nose to nose, and that's just the heat of the battle thing. That's not an indictment on either of those kids. That's a heat of the moment thing. I loved it.
Kind of love to see it, honestly.
Yeah, I mean, and there was a play later where Winston actually hits the ground, and Lola was the first kid there to like help her up. Like, the sportsmanship is unbelievable between those two teams for how much history and how much present day drama you could probably create. But here's Lawrence Central again winning. I mentioned Lola. Again, if you're not, we have to contextualize everything with Lawrence Central. And the reason why we have to contextualize that is because if you're going to read tweets or you're going to look at box scores, you're going to look at it and you're going to say, oh, well, Jayla did this or Lola did this. Like Lola in that game down the stretch, and I'm doing this off the top of my head, she had a high-low dead ball change of possession ATO situation against the zone where she caught the ball short corner, hit a sweet kind of no-look dive to Anaya McKenzie, who gets a layup. She hits 2 free throws late, which I think they were down 2 when she's standing at the line, tied the game. They also went to her on the elbow where she had kind of a nice reverse pivot, hit a short little 17-foot jumper. So Lola made winning plays down the stretch in that game, but Anaya McKenzie, if you go back and watch it, was probably the key to it. They got a couple of Abdurakeep threes, which were big. But Scout, the big change that I think Stephen Thomas, and that whether it was intentional or unintentional or just something that happened within the game flow, they didn't seem like they wanted to let Jayla Lampley go out and try to get 25-30 in this game. They were jumping her left hand. She's really, really good with her left hand, particularly coming off ball screen. There were a lot of instances where they even trapped on ball action when only Jayla was coming off that on ball action. So a lot of the defense really flowed that way. And when that happens, other kids have to step up. And Abdurkeep always steps up. And Lola Lampley always steps up. And Anaya McKenzie now, I think we have to say, she always steps up now too. But she was everywhere, man. She was getting offensive rebounds. I don't know her final stat line, but it was pretty darn close to a double-double, I bet. But she was really good. And I thought her speed against Janiyah Thomas and Natalia Franklin really showed out too, because there were a couple of run-out situations that McKenzie got when she got out ahead of the floor and got some easy baskets. And easy baskets aren't something that happens when LC plays LN. But that's now 2 wins and as many tries. And so now what Lawrence North has to say is they're on the side of the coin that's like, well, it's difficult to beat a team 3 times. Lawrence Central, in their locker room, they're probably like, they can't beat us. So I think Lawrence Central and Lawrence North, I don't think that we can throw it out. I mean, Steven tried some different things, but in the end, the Marion County quarterfinal loss and the regular season matchup that was played 2 nights ago, the inability of Lawrence North to keep the floor spread and handle the pressure against the odd front zone was again their eventual undoing. I don't go to Lawrence North to draw a conclusion from that. I go to teams like Franklin and Center Grove and other teams that Lawrence Central could potentially have to get through in the South. It'll be interesting to see if those other teams can spread the floor get those long diagonal passes, get the skip passes, able to throw over the zone, handle the trap when they are trapped without turning it over live ball. Right now, I think Lawrence North is going to have a third opportunity to do it. Very, very likely they're going to have a third opportunity to do it, but it's going to be tough sledding because that Lawrence Central outfit is really, really playing well right now.
Well, Lawrence Central, by the way, and this is something you can read about in the Fab 15, first time they've beaten LN twice in the same season since 2000, 2001, and just the second time they've won consecutive games in the series over that time span. So big deal for them. And like you said, I mean, I look at Lawrence Central season now and just taking the airplane view, kind of feels like that LN win in the Marion County quarterfinals is kind of like the launching point for this team's season. Because you remember, they'd lost some close games before that. And John Lampley was very open and candid. And that the girls just didn't make plays down the stretch. They made some boneheaded mistakes. And that happens with a young team. But they didn't against LN. And it seems like ever since then, the confidence has been building. And obviously, you know, they played a few good in-state teams, but the in-state's left a little bit to be desired, I would argue. But they played some good out-of-state teams, and that counts. It may not count in the Sagrins or the Pooles or whatever, but it counts just the same in the locker room. And when it comes time to apply it in games like that one on Thursday and in games that are going to be coming up here in the sectional. And I pray to God that we do not have LNLC on like opening night or something, you know, stupid where one team season's ending on January 31st and not sectional championship Saturday. So if we could just
and you know, I mean, you just talked that into existence that we're headed toward a football Brownsburg Ben Davis opening night between Lawrence North and Lawrence Central, but maybe that's apropos. Maybe we just get, you know, we get the questions answered early as to who the city team is that's gonna have to deal with teams like Jennings County and Center Grove and Franklin, and we'll probably get that one on Tuesday.
God, I hope not. That'd be interesting. We'll have to ask Josh about that. If you would prefer, if you're LN, if you'd prefer to have it right out of the gate, or if you'd rather have a chance to get some games on your belt and go. If you want to just get Goliath out of the way right away, or if you want to wait, it'd be interesting. We should probably mention before we get out of here, Danny, Franklin and the big win that they had over Plainfield last week. I think I made it put it in the ticker, but I mean, they dominated 61-39 on Wednesday night. It's not surprising that they won necessarily. I think Franklin was the favorite just with the firepower experience that they have. But to do it in that fashion where they controlled it from the opening tip, I mean, that was tip your cap.
Yeah. Franklin might be peaking. I think it's 11 straight wins now. They're scoring over 60 points with relative ease. They're starting to shoot the ball better. They're starting to get a little bit more comfortable, I think. They are probably the team that could present a team like Lawrence Central and Lawrence North, for that matter, with some problems because of the way they shoot the basketball and spread the floor. So Franklin, and at the risk of redundancy, because I always talk about it with their identity, the implementation of your game plan for that game is in playing Franklin. Anybody playing Franklin probably needs to be more than a day. So I think for Franklin, I think the draw is going to be pretty considerable. And if you look at where there's a 2-game day, I think it's semi-state now, right? So that's where they do the 10, noon, 8 p.m. format. If I'm a basketball team like Lawrence Central, I would probably want Franklin in the second game of not in the second game of a day. So to give you more time to prepare for them, to give you more time to really study the film and see how they spread it. If Franklin gets like a week to prepare, it's going to add some complexity, I think, to the game flow, because I think that Armstrong has the opportunity to put something in a little bit special. If it is just, you know, apples to apples, athlete to athlete, player to player, coach to coach, the talent of Lawrence Central is going to be something going to be very difficult to deal with. But I think the one thing that we're learning about Franklin is these teams, the 11 teams that have lost to them in as many tries, are all they've never seen that before. Like, they've never seen anybody spread the floor like that. They've never seen anybody flood the weak side of the floor the way that they do, to value the 3-point shot, more so than even strong side layups sometimes. But it's really unique. If you're a girls basketball fan and haven't seen Franklin, It's such a cliche and such a bad cliche, quite honestly, but they're probably the most like that kind of Golden State Warriors style spread, that Steph Curry kind of spread kind of basketball. But they're a fun watch, but I think they're really peaking right now. And to say that they're one of the favorites in the South, I think is obvious. But I just kind of look at how they match up, and Lawrence Central has just disposed of everybody. But I think Franklin and Center Grove could really, really probably be the two teams that can give them problems.
The intrigue with Franklin is going to be that regional draw, like Danny alluded to, and semi-state, obviously. But first up will be the regional draw, where they could face either Center Grove or Mooresville out of Sectional 13, 15 with BNL or Jennings County, or Castle out of Sectional 16. None of those will be easy outs. If you're going to pick one, probably be Castle, I guess, just because. Yeah. Probably familiarity bias, because we've seen the other teams more than
Agreed.
Castle down there. We'll have Kyle Soakland on hopefully at some point to talk about Castle or Kyle or Treasure to talk about that. But like you said, for some of these teams, the intrigue is in the regional draw more so than the sectional draw. Other teams like LC, anybody in sectional 8, et cetera, the intrigue is in the sectional draw. So it'll be fun to see. Danny, you want to talk about Lillie Graves today or save it for Tuesday?
I mean, you can tease it. Just tease it.
19 of her 32, 31, some stupid number of 30 points in the fourth quarter. Just took off, subbed out for a couple minutes in the third quarter, talked to the coach, came back in, and just took off. And I mean, what's crazy about that kid is you see her play, and even when she's missing shots and not playing up to her standard, you can still see the potential there. It's just like, oh, she just needs to get a little bit stronger. Oh, this is a thing that's going to come as she gets older. I mean, he is unbelievable, just unbelievably fun. And it was so cool. The environment was great there. And it's cool hearing how McCutcheon girls basketball, like the interest has grown, and just Lillie herself, how she's handled the attention where she has people coming up to her as a fifth grader. And this is a tease for a story that I'm going to have later this week, where people are coming up to her as a fifth grader and saying, I can't wait to see you play in high school. Like, how cool is that?
Yeah, that's cool.
Like, you're that big of a freaking deal. And she's lived up to the hype. Awesome kid, really well spoken. Honestly, as basically everybody is in girls' high school sports in Indiana, I've learned, which is just fantastic. But yeah, just an awesome kid, awesome performance by her, and a huge win over Carroll. Ignore the class designations. Carroll's a really good team, and that's a great win from a rebuilding McCutcheon team. Yep,
absolutely.
That's all we got for today. We thank you all. For those who watch live, for those who are watching again on YouTube, I'll have the timestamps and all that in here. Danny, Josh, Courtney, and I will be back on Tuesday, potentially with a surprise guest. Who knows? Talk some state tournament. I think, Danny, it'll probably be worthwhile revisiting the middle school discussion, because Courtney didn't get a chance to weigh in. A former colleague of mine at the Indy Star, he's a little bit before my time, but he wants to weigh in as well. Mike Wells, I think.
Yeah.
So
that got a ton of reaction. That got a ton of views. That got a ton of comments. I got a ton of texts. I got a ton of phone calls. There's a lot of people that have an opinion on that. Another thing that we can talk about too, girls, boys, doubleheaders. Like last night, girls, boys, doubleheader was up at Homestead Snider, girls, boys, doubleheader at Westfield HSE, girls, boys, doubleheader at Zionsville-Noblesville. I mean, can we normalize? These are awesome. They're just awesome. And there is nothing wrong with the girls playing at 6. They get a boys crowd. I'll tell a little bit of a story as my parting shot here. I was actually sitting way back and way up, kind of out of everybody's earshot, but there were some students that were sitting behind me that were there for the boys game, but not sitting in the student section at the time. They were going to move down when the girls game was over. And there was one kid, and I never turned around to see who it was or whoever. It was just a kid, and I could hear the conversation, who was more educated than everybody else that he was sitting with. And he was explaining to his friends who Myah McAlusky was, who KK Holman was, awesome, where they were going to school. And so just in a really microcosm sample size of one row in a game that had, probably 2,000 people at it, there was some education that was happening and people familiarizing themselves with the girls' personnel on the floor. And these crowds for boys, girls, doubleheaders, regardless of the weather, are great. And I think it's great for the girls. It's a great way to evangelize. It's a great way to bring cohesion between the boys and the girls. It's a great way to expand your network of fans. I don't know. Again, I've said it before. I've never been an athletic director. I've never scheduled, but that seems like something that we need to normalize and popularize and do more, because I think it's awesome for the girls.
Seems like there's been more of them this year too than in years past, which is nice. And I guess around this time of year is when they kind of pick up as it is, because everybody's playing on Friday night just to get ready for sectional. But you're right. Yeah. I like them. They're fun. I think they should do more of them, and I'm honestly not opposed either. Once you get them established, try flipping them. Let the boys play first. Let the girls have the 7:30 slot. It's not a huge difference, but it's worth a shot. They did that. They do that with some of the college tournaments sometimes, where the girls get to play second and get that prime slot. So
yeah.
I don't know, but
I'm 100 years old too. I get to be home earlier too.
Oh yeah, trust me. If it was up to me, everything would start at noon. Start at noon, be done writing, tape a show, done by like 7 o'clock, and then we go out. So I like it too. But again, we thank you all so much for watching. We'll be back with everybody on Tuesday afternoon, Tuesday evening, normal posting time. We'll have lots of games. We'll have lots of content up on there. We thank Victoria Jacobsen from the Journal Gazette for joining us, and Danny and I'll be back with everybody on Tuesday.
Cool.